Very warm welcome to all of you in this fifth session of Ambedkar Economics. And we already have covered a lot of ground in the previous four sessions. Today, we are going to look at a very important aspect of Babasaheb's economic thoughts. And I titled it as Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and Democratic Socialism, a very interesting concept or a philosophy of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar that I think has become more relevant today. So let me put up the presentation. Is it right? Okay, here we go. Share. So this is what I'm going to talk about today, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and democratic socialism, economic and constitutional law. So as we have seen in the previous sort of sessions, four sessions, uh, we have seen how Babasaheb Ambedkar was diving deeply into the various dimensions of economy, and we have seen that his research and his intervention led to a lot of uh, good things as far as the economic policies of India are concerned, including the foundation of or laying stone of the independent monetary policy institution like RBI, and his contribution to economics of India or economic development of India is tremendous, as we have seen in the previous session. So today we will be venturing into one of the very interesting aspects of Baba Saheb's economic thoughts. But before we do that, I would like to place before you these common facts. But it's always good to recap them. Like as we know that Dr. Baba Ambedkar was trained in economics, as we have seen in the first session, as to how many domains of economics he has covered in his pursuit of the doctoral degree in Columbia University, and also he had a PhD degree, research degree, another research degree in economics from London School of Economics. So they were the topmost institutions of the time. Even today, they are acclaimed institutions of excellences in this economics, in the domain of economics. And as we have seen, his interest in economics was multifaceted. And we in the first session we saw Baba Sahib's economic history of India, the way he has gone at length to explore the economic history of India. Then in the second, broadly, we have seen his thoughts on public finance. And the third, we covered his very important contribution to monetary economics. And in the last, fourth one, we looked at welfare economics and development. And we have seen how he blended together the service of the common man and extensive fieldwork. So it made him not only a very highly intellectual scholar, but he was a kind of engaged economist. He was of course, a voracious reader, a thinker, producer of many thoughts and theories, but at the same time, he was very much, the man of field, as we have seen that during his tenure as the labor minister, he traveled extensively to see for himself the condition of the laborers. And we know that he was a lawyer par excellence, and he was scholar of many fields such as history, anthropology, religions, to name a few. And he articulated a very interesting, important vision for India from very early on, starting from his public career in 1917. He articulated the vision of India as People's Republic of democracy. And we know that he was involved in the constitutional history of India, making important interventions, starting from 1917, when he first demanded the representation for the depressed classes, which were included in 1919, which is known as the Montfort reforms, all the way up to the constitution he drafted and gave to a country in 1950. So I just wanted to create this ground to show, because this is very essential information for what is going to come today in the session. Just to recapitulate Babasaheb Ambedkar's economic vision, his vision was the welfare of public, the Bahujans, which we can relate in English as public, and he emphasized on the overall economic development of the country, as we have seen in the previous section. He didn't leave any field of economics, and he understood economics at various levels in various domains, and he was somebody who had many tools in his kit. If you read his works or his contribution to the country, he was a man had having many tools in his kit, and therefore he was capable of applying various theories, ideas, and models for solving economic problems. Because this is the series about economic problem, we are talking about the economic issues. But if we look at even the social issues or the political issues, the way he had so many tools in his pocket is very interesting, and that's true about the economics itself. And his conception of a state was something that will ensure freedom from want and freedom from hunger to its citizens. They're very interesting words, and I think these words have to be repeated again and again because they encapsulate the vision of Babasaheb Ambedkar as to the duty of the state is to ensure freedom from want and freedom from hunger. And we have seen how much he contributed to what we can say the social insurances for the citizens of India. And he looked at the state as a mechanism to bring liberty, equality, and fraternity. A very interesting way of looking at the state, and as an instrument of justice, including economic justice. He was talking about the economic justice very early on. And these concepts, the background is going to help us to understand the upcoming discussion. He was, of course, fighting to remove the abject poverty in India, of course, the economic inequality, and ensure proper distribution of public resources. And he understood the role of state as a definite regulator to regulate the market and the economic lives of the people. So he was not the supporter of the laissez-faire or the free market, because as we have seen in the previous sessions, there is a market failure in a lot of domains, and therefore the state intervention or state as a regulator is a necessity. We cannot do away without the state. So, he has understood this idea very well, the role of the state as a regulator, as a kind of a framework to ensure economic justice. So I just wanted to recapitulate something like his focus was on the common man, welfare of majority. He was for increasing the purchasing power, which he thought can only come to India if India develops its manufacturing sector, particularly industrialization, modern agriculture, and he was for the capital investment in these two areas. And we have seen that he has the approach that included different dimensions of development, like the dams and the electricity, water transport, and so on and so forth. And he looked at industrialization and urbanization as the engine of development, and of course distribution of public resources to ensure economic equality, public ownership of the essential resources, and he was for the targeted economic and social policies for ensuring equality. As we have seen in the previous session, that the equality is not going to come automatically. There has to be the targeted policies, as we have seen from Arrow's impossibility theorem, that there cannot be an efficient social function which will be applicable to all the components of the society. So there has to be targeted economic and social policies for the groups which are economically excluded. And of course, we know that he saw the role of state as an active role in regulating, planning, and development of the economy. And most importantly, his idea was very fundamental. He wanted to include economic rights as the fundamental rights. And I think that's the heart of his economic thinking, making the economic rights as the fundamental right, which couldn't happen. But that possibility to include economic rights in the fundamental rights is wonderful, and we are going to see how he arrived at that conclusion. So, Babasaheb Ambedkar, of course, as we know that he was a man of having many tools in his kit, and of course he was not for totally regulating the private sector, because he saw the definite role of the private sector. But he had some suspicions about he was a skeptic about certain aspects of capitalism, as we know that he was very much skeptic towards unregulated crony and caste capitalism. So we can see that in his speeches as to how critical he was of the caste capitalism or the crony capitalism or unregulated capitalism. And we see how this unregulated crony and caste capitalism has laid our country to where we are today in terms of the glaring contradictions in the society. And he propounded that unregulated capitalism perpetuates inequality and exploitation. In case of India, perpetuates the caste-based injustice. And we know from the empirical studies now that the whole arena of, the whole dominance of a few caste over the capital in this country. There was a study which conclusively proved that the capital market capitalization, if we see, there hardly the scheduled caste and the OBCs are included in the share of capital. 90%, more than 90% of the capital is in the hands of a few caste. So, there is this danger, and he thought that a combination of the private and the public, a kind of a mixed economy, can balance growth and equity. There is, of course, no trickle down effect. There has to be targeted policies. The money is never going to flow from the rich classes to the poor classes just like that. There has to be targeted policies, a kind of a tax regime which ensures that the money is distributed. Every economy needs regulation and state intervention. So you cannot have the free markets, because the market fails in many counts, as we have seen in the previous session. Economic inequality is a structural issue. It's not an individual issue as it is posed. It's a structural issue and needs to address structure, structural issue like that, in terms of thinking through the structure, thinking to the shape of the economic structure, or form of economic structure, as Babasaheb Ambedkar would call it. And economic planning is needed for wealth distribution, and there is a need of social audits of the economic policy. You cannot just have the economic policies and look at the profit as the only indicator of the development, growth as the only indicator of the development. As one of the UN documents says, that economic development is a means and the human development is an end. So ultimately, we have to look at, and what is human development is growth, not only growth but also democracy, equality, and all that makes a human being to live a proper life. So there is a need of social audits of the economic policies. And I have just used some tools, AI tools, to come to this, to find out who are the critics of the capitalism today. So how capitalism can perpetuate inequality? Of course, Marx has clearly laid out arguments against the capitalism. He has talked about the class struggle between the bourgeoisie and proletariat. And, according to Marx, this disparity is not just a byproduct of capitalism, but an inherent feature of the system, as profit is generated through the labor of workers who receive only a fraction of the value they create. So, of course, the problem of surplus value, this understanding is taken further by the renowned economists today, like Varoufakis, a Greek economist, and he talks about these ideas, and many more people talk about these ideas. And of course, liberalism and wealth concentration. The rise of neoliberal economic policies, even in case of India, particularly since the late 20th century, emphasize deregulation, privatization, and reduced governmental intervention. And critics argue that these policies have led to increased wealth concentration among the elites. It's true for India. It's true for wherever these neoliberal policies are implemented, and because they favor the capital owners and multinational corporations over labor. And this exacerbates income inequality, as the rich benefit disproportionately from tax cuts and reducing social spending, and while lower income groups face stagnant wages and reduced access to public services. So we have seen that it's not all is well with capitalism. There are a lot of pitfalls, and there are a lot of damaging things that the unbridled, uncontrolled, unregulated capitalism can unleash on the masses. So of course, there is Kuznets curve, where Kuznets proposed an inverted U-shaped curve to describe the relationship between economic growth and income inequality. And he argues that the development doesn't always lead to the equality. And that's the Kuznets' very famous curve, the U-shaped curve. Sometimes it talked in terms of the J-shaped curve. And of course, Piketty's recent take on capital in the 20th century, 21st century, and he he comes to the similar conclusions through his research. And economist Thomas Piketty argues that the return on capital R tends to exceed the growth rate of the economy G, leading to the concentration of wealth among those who already purchase it. So the richer get the richer get richer, and the poorer gets it poorer. That's what happens. If the return on capital R tends to exceed the growth rate of economy, then obviously the concentration of the wealth will be in the hands of a few over the time. And like Babasaheb Ambedkar, Piketty advocates for wealth redistribution through progressive taxation as a means to counteract this effect. So that's one of the remedies suggested by Professor Piketty. There can be many remedies which can come into play to see how this how the wealth concentrated in the hands of a few can be destroyed. These are all scientific studies. And when it comes to the capitalism and social justice, as we know that the castes are economically inefficient, and because of the inequality, their access to capital is limited to a particular group of people. And theories regarding access to resources and opportunities illustrate how capitalism can perpetuate inequality, because those who are having the access to the capital, they will produce more and more capital, but those who do not have access to the capital, they will be left behind. And so there are hurdles like credit constraints, very difficult for the poorer or even the scheduled caste OBCs to get the credits, or they do not have access to education, or then they face discrimination in the economic domain, and there are no economic opportunities for them. So there is of course the problem of access to capital. As we have seen, market failure, the market is free market is not that beneficial to the masses. It has to be regulated, and we've seen it at length in the previous sessions. And of course, skill based technological change, because the technology is changing all the time, and the skills have to be upgraded all the time. And if the skills are only left in the hands of a few handful of the people, then of course we know that it's going to create a kind of a skewed or very distorted economic organization of the society. So I just wanted to put it here, how Babasaheb Ambedkar's criticism of the unbridled caste and crony capitalism have advocates today, and in all over the world. And it's not, Babasaheb Ambedkar was not somebody who was arguing against some of the dreaded attributes of capitalism. And we know across the economic field now people are offering a lot of capitalism, as we have critique of capitalism, as we have seen in these slides. Also, Babasaheb Ambedkar not found that all is well with Marxism, and he had his own criticism of Marxism, which I'm going to go in the last session when we discuss Buddhist economics. But here we are looking at communism and its Indian advocates. It's a very interesting field. And but Babasaheb Ambedkar, of course, we know he saw that the Marxist in India, particularly the Brahminical Marxists, they never thought about the neglect. They never thought about the caste as a category to be included in the discussion on the Marxist, quote unquote revolution. And the primary, focus on two classes. And Babasaheb Ambedkar says that the proletariat in India itself is posed against each other. The caste won't enable the laboring masses to come together and work together because of the caste system. Right? He offers a very beautiful critique of that, and he thinks that without the annihilation of the caste, we cannot go forward, and rightly so. And Babasaheb Ambedkar was, of course, believed that Marxism focuses on just economic factors, and there are many factors which contribute to the social operation or even economic operation. As in case of our country, the Brahmanism contributes to to a far extent to the economic injustice. And it's not a scientific theory, as Babasaheb Ambedkar said in the Buddha of Marx, that we cannot apply it universally. So let's move forward, and it doesn't offer the scope for the political rights as Babasaheb Ambedkar intended for the marginalized people in India. So I'm not going to last point, revolution. And Babasaheb Ambedkar didn't believe in the bloodshed or in the violent struggle, and though he was in favor of force, and we are going to look at some of that in the when we come to the Buddhist economy, as to how violence can be avoided and what use of the force there is. And we have touched upon this idea of force when Babasaheb Ambedkar critiqued Bertrand Russell. So, of course, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar is not for the violent and the bloody revolution. And he was a man who believed deeply in the democratic processes and in the democratic means, which we are going to, elaborate in the upcoming session, the last session. But suffice here is to say that he was not on the side of the violent revolution. So that is what it is. The two dominant ideologies of the day, even today, capitalism and communism. They are the two um dominant ideologies. Of course, there are local forms of that in all different countries, but basically these are the two dominant forms of ideologies that we see. So where does Babasaheb Ambedkar stand in terms of his understanding? And I found it very, very prophetic, even I would say deeply insightful, that his vision was of the democratic socialism, a very fundamental concept. And had India walked on this path, the situation of the country would have been different. And let me offer you a definition of what Babasaheb Ambedkar meant by democratic socialism. And we are going to go into the depth of it. And I found it very exciting when I was looking into this conceptual framework that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar built in order to explain what is this democratic socialism. And of course, democracy is a comprehensive system encompassing social, political, and economic organization of the society. I'm sorry, the political is to be repeated here. It should be economic organization of the society. And a democratic form of government presupposes a democratic form of society. We cannot have democratic form of government if the society is undemocratic. As Baba Ambedkar says, you cannot create a castle on the cow dung. You need a solid foundation in the society to have a true democracy. And he says the formal framework of it is of no value and indeed would be a misfit if there were no social democracy. You see, and he says the politicals never realized that democracy was not a form of government, it is essentially a form of society. So, very insightful statements. You see, it is not just about the parliamentary democracy, one man, one vote. It's very much deeper in terms of the one man, one value. And we see how Babasaheb Ambedkar argues his vision, not just about the society, but also economy and the politics. And I think that's what makes Babasaheb Ambedkar special. And he stands out as an economist par excellence in the field of economic studies, because he is not just an economist, he was a polymath, as we have seen, and he played an important role. I think I would even say the most important role. He's the chief architect, or even the architect of the Constitution of India. And what he did there, and what he wanted to do, was something which had never happened. And I'm going to show you how Babasaheb Ambedkar articulated his vision of democratic socialism, which is not, just about free market or communism, state-controlled communism. It's very deep. So let's look at this very important concept. This is the next 10 minutes is going to be a little bit of a roller coaster, because there are so many ideas, and I took this material straight away from Baba Saheb's writings, particularly from the State and Minority, the document, the constitution that he suggested, and on the behalf of All India Scheduled Caste Federation, which was submitted to the Constituent Assembly. And it has profound ideologies, profound ideas, and profound concepts. So, the document has to be read on its own terms. But for the discussion today, I try to bring to you one of the annexures there, and Baba Ambedkar talks. And I try to title it in a different ways, but the content remains the same. Just to have the flow of thinking, I have titled it given some subtitles. But it's a very profound sort of the text, I would say, and it takes a lot, to tease out a lot of beautiful ideas that are so important even today. So, parliamentary democracy, of course, we know that Baba Ambedkar was for democracy from very early on. He studied with the philosopher of democracy in USA, John Dewey, as we know. And, he had profound sort of understanding of what the state socialism. I think he was very much influenced by the German socialists. and of course the constitution. So these three elements, how he wanted to bring together in order to create an economic vision for this country. So let's look at the fundamentals of Babasaheb Ambedkar's economic philosophy. Of course, there can be other ways to conceive Babasaheb Ambedkar's economic philosophy, but for today, I thought that that particular part from the state and minorities is very important to dwell into. So let's look at it. Political democracy, as we know, rests on four premises, which may be set out in the following terms. A very pithy premises. They are like axioms. They are like the basic statements without which the political democracy cannot come into being. So the first premise is the individual is an end in itself. Himself. Very, very profound. Each of them can be elaborated. So what Babasaheb Ambedkar says that the individual is an end in himself. He exists by himself, and that the individual has certain inalienable rights which must be guaranteed to him by the constitution. So in the scheme of Babasaheb Ambedkar, the individual is center. Though he critiqued individualism, and he says that there are two forces: the force of individualism and fraternity. And he's of course in the side of fraternity, community, society. That's given. But here in the discussion, he says, and very interestingly, he says that the individual has certain inalienable rights which must be guaranteed to him by the constitution. You follow this flow of thinking, and you arrive at a very, very, very insightful conclusions that the individuals shall not be required to relinquish, very interesting term, any of his constitutional rights as a condition precedent to the receipt of a privilege. So an individual is not supposed to relinquish any of his right. He's not required to relinquish any of his constitutional rights. And the fourth premise is so important. It's so pithy that it's applicable even today, that the state shall not delegate powers to private persons to govern others. This is so foundational and basic concept of political democracy, that the state will never delegate the powers to private persons to govern others. So if you understand these four premises of political democracy, Babasaheb Ambedkar says that anyone who studies the working of the system of social economy based on private enterprise and pursuit of personal gain will realize how it undermines, if it does not actually violate, the last two premises on which democracy rests. So if you have a free market or unbridled capitalism, it undermines the political democracy. It's a very insightful statement. It's such a these premises have such a depth, and the analysis has such a profound, I would say, edge to it, that nobody can argue against it. You cannot argue against these four premises. They are like given. Nobody is going to say that just take my rights. So you see, how many have to relinquish their constitutional rights in order to gain their living? How many have to subject themselves to be governed by private employers? You see, today in the era of contracts, when the labor laws are flouted and destroyed, a lot of the people are at the mercy of the private people, companies, and so on and so forth. Such a profound analysis Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has put up here. And those who are unemployed, whether what are called the fundamental rights are of any value to them. You see now the analysis, okay? So economic needs and the ethics of democracy. I just titled it in order to create the flow of thinking for myself. It might be helpful to you. But economic rights as fundamental rights. You cannot have economic rights, not fundamental or natural rights. And if a person who is unemployed is offered a choice between a job of some sort, with some sort of wages, with no fixed hours of labor, and with an interdict on joining a union, and the exercise of his right to freedom of speech, association, religion, can there be any doubt as to what his choice will be? How can it be otherwise? So when there is a the constitutional rights, or an unemployed person has to fill in his belly to sustain his life, what he will do? The fear of starvation, the fear of losing a house, the fear of losing savings, if any, the fear of being compelled to take children away from school, the fear of having to be a burden on public charity, the fear of having to be burned or buried at public cost are factors too strong to permit a man to stand out for his fundamental rights. If the individual is, if a slave, in the case of a slavery, even if there are rights, fundamental rights, they cannot exercise, they cannot use them, because their livelihood depends on a private individual, so much so that even if there is a freedom available, they cannot avail it. Even if there is a political freedom, if you do not have the economic and social freedom, you cannot avail it. The unemployed are thus compelled to relinquish their fundamental rights for the sake of securing the privilege to work and to subsist. So when there is an unregulated market like this, then there is a liberty for few and slavery for the majority. Therefore, the economic rights should be legally enforceable, as we will see from this beautiful, the logic of Babasaheb, understanding of Babasaheb. The constitutional lawyers assume that the enactment of fundamental rights is enough to safeguard their liberty and that nothing more is called for. They say that the constitutional lawyer says that if there is a fundamental rights, that's enough. You don't need anything anymore, nothing, you don't need anything more than that. They argue that where the state refrains from intervention in private affairs, the kind of dialogue that's taking place in America, give it everything to private affairs, economic and social, the residue is liberty. What is necessary is to make the residue as large as possible and state intervention as small as possible. It is true that where the state refrains from intervention, what remains is liberty. But this does not dispel of the matter. One more question remains to be answered. To whom and for whom is this liberty? Obviously, this liberty is liberty to the landlords to increase rents, for capitalists to increase hours of work and reduce rate of wages. This must be so. It cannot be otherwise. For in an economic system employing armies of workers, producing goods en mass at regular intervals, someone must make rules so that workers will work and wheels of industry run on. If the state does not do it, the private employer will. Life otherwise will become impossible. In other words, what is called liberty from the control of the state is another name for the dictatorship of the private employer. You see, very, very interesting. What do we want? We want the control of the state or we want the dictatorship of the private employer. Very, very profound analysis. Let me go further. Powerful and powerless. How government can limit the power of the powerful. There's a need to control, bridle the uncontrolled power of those who have so much power. So how to prevent such a thing from happening? So how to protect the unemployed as well as the unemployed as well as employed from being cheated out of their fundamental rights to life, liberty and pursuit of happiness? The useful remedy adopted by democratic countries is to limit the power of government to impose arbitrary restraints in political domain and to invoke the ordinary power of the legislature to restrain the more powerful individuals from imposing arbitrary restraints on the less powerful in the economic field. The inadequacy maybe the futility of the plan has been well established. The successful invocation by the less powerful of the authority of the legislature is a doubtful proposition. Having regard to the fact that even under adult franchise, all legislatures and governments are controlled by the more powerful, an appeal to the legislature to intervene is a precarious safeguard against the invasion of liberty of the less powerful. Who controls the parliament? The powerful, the capitalist, and the plan follows quite a different method. It seeks to limit not only the power of government to impose arbitrary restraints, but also of the more powerful individuals, or to be more precise, to eliminate the possibility of the more powerful having the power to impose arbitrary restraints on the less powerful by withdrawing from the control he has over the economic life of the people. So very, very, very deep understanding. This is even true today. It's true in all the countries which doesn't have the economic justice as a vision. Our country has enshrined the economic justice as a vision. There is in the constitution, the preamble says that there has to be economic justice. So let me go further. I'm not going to read it through, but what Babasaheb Ambedkar says that the individual liberty can be only secured in what is called the state socialism. So those who want the economic structure of society to be modeled on state socialism must realize that they cannot leave the fulfillment of so fundamental a purpose or to the exigencies of ordinary law, which simple majority whose political fortunes are never determined by rational causes. You see, the political fortunes are never determined by the. He is far ahead of the time. These are all new theories as to how the choices are made. They are never governed by the rational choices, as we know in the elections. And the majority can go wrong. It's not that they can this or that's always right. And for these reasons, political democracy seems to be unsuited for the purpose, because political democracy ultimately means the rule of the majority. And Babasaheb Ambedkar talks about a very deep democracy. He talks about social democracy, talks about moral democracy, talks about intellectual democracy, isn't it? So mere political democracy is not going to benefit because it will be controlled. In the absence of the social and economic democracy, it will be controlled by the powerful people. And therefore, as we have seen, even today, the political democracy has failed miserably to the larger masses of the people, and it's unsuitable. So, Boss Ambedkar is arguing that, we have a political democracy, which is very important, but political democracy per se is not going to bring, the changes in the lives of the majority of the people. In case of India, the public, the Bahujans. So, what is his solution? So, the state socialism, according to the Marxian concept, comes through the dictatorship of the proletariat. And we have seen in the history what has happened to the dictatorship of the proletariat, all the regimes there are. And Baba Ambedkar was very wary of this concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And he was, of course, wary of the concept of the dictatorship itself because he was a Democrat. And and what is the alternative? The alternative is dictatorship if we do not have the political democracy. And there is no doubt that the dictatorship can give the permanence which state socialism requires as an essential condition for its fructification. There's no doubt. If you want to sustain something for a long period, we need dictatorship of some sort. That's what Baba Ambedkar is saying here. But when we have a dictatorship, the liberty is lost. So, those who believe in individual freedom strongly object to dictatorship, and rightly so, and insist upon parliamentary democracy as a proper form of government for a free society. For they feel that the freedom of individual is possible only under the parliamentary democracy and not under the dictatorship. Consequently, those who want freedom are not prepared to give up parliamentary democracy as a form of government. However much they may be anxious to have state socialism, they will not be ready to exchange parliamentary democracy for dictatorship, even though the gain by such an exchange is the achievement of state socialism. The problem, therefore, is to have state socialism without dictatorship, to have state socialism with parliamentary democracy. Very insightful. And how does Baba Ambedkar want to do it? How does he want to do it? He is talking about bringing together the political democracy, state socialism, and the constitution. This is a very fundamental insight of Baba Ambedkar. So I titled it as an evolving triangular framework of perfect justice. If we need to have a perfect justice, economic, social, and political justice, you need to have this big triangulation of these three important concepts: the political democracy, state socialism, and the constitution. And as Baba Ambedkar says, the only way out seems to be to retain parliamentary democracy and to prescribe state socialism by the law of the constitution. So very profound. So that it will be beyond the reach of a parliamentary majority to suspend, amend, or abrogate it. So make state socialism, bring socialism, state socialism by the law of constitution. It is only by this that one can achieve the triple object, namely to establish socialism, retain parliamentary democracy, and avoid dictatorship. The proposal marks a departure from the existing constitutions. There was no constitution in the world, and there is no constitution in the world which would have done it. And Baba Ambedkar wanted to do it. He wanted to make economic rights as the fundamental rights. We will see what happened to that. And the result is that the political structure is completely set at naught by the forces which emerge from the economic structure, which is at variance with the political structure. Those who want socialism with parliamentary democracy and without dictatorship should welcome this proposal. So this is Babasaheb's proposal, because he doesn't mean only adult franchise and fundamental rights as the democracy. He goes deeper than that. He says the soul of democracy is the doctrine of one man, one value. It's a very, very pithy, profound concept. We have to have session on each of the premises that Baba Ambedkar has stated here. And all the constitutional law in the world only talk about the adult franchise and universal adult suffrage and fundamental rights. Baba Ambedkar says that they have never advocated or advanced to the conception that the constitutional law of democracy must go beyond adult suffrage and fundamental rights. And what is the shape and form of economic structure of the country is very important. And Baba Ambedkar said and made a statement: capitalism and Brahmanism are the two enemies of the masses. So very, this topic is so important to look into. Some of you might find ideas little complex. But if you pursue the arguments of Babasaheb Ambedkar, at the end of it, you see the sparkling brilliance of Babasaheb Ambedkar, see the genius of his ideas, the way he constructed the economic theories coupled with how to bring the economic justice. Now economists talk about economic justice, climate justice, and so on and so forth. Look at how prophetic Babasaheb Ambedkar was. And so, Baba Ambedkar says that the constitutional lawyers in the past, they did not, consider the shape and form of the economic structure of society. It's very important to prescribe in the constitution the shape and form of the economic structure of society. When the preamble was amended later, the word socialist was added. So you see, there is a lot of, these ideas are there in the Constitution of India. But the implementers, they don't look at these ideas. As Baba Ambedkar said, the constitution is good. It's the best constitution. It has a framework to bring the revolution, blood-led revolution. But if you build a beautiful temple, but if that temple is taken by the devil, the whole temple means nothing. That's the analogy that Dr. Baba Ambedkar gives. So you see, Baba Ambedkar says that uh, the shape and the form of the economic structure of the society must be prescribed by the constitution if democracy is to live up to its principle of one man, one value. It's a very, very foundational insight that Baba Ambedkar has arrived at. And time has come to take a bold step and define both the economic structure as well as the political structure of society by the law of constitution. All countries like India, which are latecomers in the field of constitution making, should not copy the faults of other countries. They should profit by the experience of their predecessors. That's very, this man, the brilliance of Babasaheb Ambedkar, his genius, his understanding is something that dawns on us when we follow through his analysis. So what happened? Let's look at it. What happened? Babasaheb Ambedkar wanted to make economic rights he wanted to have the form and the shape of the economic structure inbuilt in the constitution. What happened? So Babasaheb Ambedkar's constitutional contribution is well known, but I'm going to just broach upon some important points. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has played important roles since 1917, and he intervened at various stages of the constitution making, not just starting from 1946, but also if you look at the roundtable conferences and the cabinet plan and the Cripps mission and all the way up to the Constitution of India, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar had played a very important role. If you look at the debates of the roundtable conferences, he talks about adult franchise, he talks about democracy, he talks about justice. You see, he's very, you know, his intervention in the constitutional making of India just doesn't begin in 1946. As the roots are there in the roundtable conferences if you pick up the debates. And economic rights were not included in the part 3 of the constitution as Babasaheb Ambedkar wanted. And as we know that the fundamental rights are legally enforceable, there is a matrix of the rights, and Article 32 ensures that nobody can take away your fundamental rights, including the government, including the state cannot take a. You have a direct remedy if you can directly approach to the highest arbiter of law in this country, the Supreme Court itself. And they are so foundational and fundamental to the individuals that they cannot be taken away. And the shape and form of economic structure of society was not defined by the constitution. However, the word socialism was later added to the preamble. And the economic rights, shape, and form of economic structure was to a great extent included in the directive principles of state policies in the part 4 of the constitution, but they are instruments of instructions to the government and they are not legally enforceable. There is a right to work, and there is, as we have seen in the previous sessions, that the fundamental some of the articles offer a kind of a vision of the economic shape or the form that has to be there. And increasingly Article 21 is coming into shape, which comes closely to the right to housing, right to have health, comes closely to the economic rights, but it's not enough. It's not enough, but there is a scope in the Indian constitution to develop this shape and form of economic structure. So just to give you an illustration, the state and minorities had a profound impact on the Indian constitution. This analysis is done by D.C. Ahir, where he shows how much of the fundamental rights were copied or borrowed or influenced by the state and minorities that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has written in 1947 and submitted to the Constituent Assembly. You can see that almost all the rights or fundamental rights are coming uh, from the state and minorities, but not the economic rights. And that's the tragedy of this country. So what happened to the economic rights, which were to be made fundamental to the fundamental rights of the Constitution, including Part 3? It couldn't happen. So in the way of summary, I'm going to tell you what has happened. So if you look at the Ambedkar principles of the democratic socialism, the summary can be the change in the economic structure of India by adopting state socialism, political democracy, and making political democracy and state socialism the law of the Constitution. And it's the obligation of the state to plan the economic life of the people, state ownership and management of all key and basic industries and insurance, agriculture to be organized on collective basis. State socialism is essential for the rapid industrialization of India, because the government can pump a lot of capital investment in the industrial domain and agriculture. And the private enterprises, if they are not controlled, unbridled capitalism, free market can lead to the economic inequalities of wealth, and established state socialism by law of constitution, unalterable by any act of legislature and executive, like the fundamental rights. They cannot be changed by the legislature or executive. And the program of socialism in the fundamental rights, Babasaheb wanted to mainstream these ideas in the fundamental rights. And Babasaheb Ambedkar thought that the cultural transformation of caste-ridden village societies could be achieved only through industrialization. So this project of Babasaheb Ambedkar to include the economic rights in the fundamental rights was stalled by Sardar Patel and J.B. Kripalani. We won't go into the politics of that, but that's what has happened. And the project was stalled, and the economic rights couldn't become the part of the fundamental rights. So where are we today? We are far from the vision of Babasaheb Ambedkar, the founding father of India, as we can see from the discussion on economics, from the discussion on constitution. We can see that in a sense he had given this country a vision, a very profound vision. But what happened to it? Even today, the economic structure reflects the caste-based social structure. It mirrors the caste-based social structure. And we are far from the democratic society as conceived by Babasaheb Ambedkar, based on one man, one value. We're far from it. We are poor and hungry nation. The crony capitalism is destroying the Indian democracy. Just the news yesterday, $230 million in the kickbacks to the politicians. How murky is the picture of crony capitalism in this country, and it has destroyed the authority of the state. And it's a reason to be very much worried about what's happening in this country today. The masses, the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, other backward class and minorities are excluded from the larger economy. Their share in the capital is very less, meager. I reckon it's less than 10%, even less than that. And the industrialization in India is not realized. The manufacturing sector is struck. It is negative, always showing negative growth. The capital investment never went into the industrialization, just as happened in China. The state pumped so much money in the industrialization of the country. So, agriculture, people think that there are so many people who are employed in agriculture, but it's a disguised employment. And today, the labor laws are replaced by the contracts that favor capitalists and undermine the fundamental rights of the people. The directive principles, very lofty ideals, offering a vision of economic structure of the society, but they are never made the instruments of the instruction to the government. They are just there for the namesake. The education is privatized. It is a duty of the state to provide education, which is totally now being privatized, and unbridled liberalization of Indian economy, leading to glaring inequalities, concentration of the wealth in the hands of the few. So this is Babasaheb Ambedkar. He is as early as 1928. He is making a case for the education of all. So he has given in one column the population and the order in respect of education. So the advanced Hindus, including Brahmins and allied caste, in the rank of population, they are fourth, but they are first in education. And you look at the depressed classes and tribes, their population is second, but they have no education. So you see, this reflects the realities. Even if we survey today, we can find, empirically, what is going wrong in this country. So I just wanted to end this session with the contemporary sort of happenings and multidimensional poverty index and India. So in India today, in 1920, in 2024, 234 million individuals living in poverty. That's a huge number. And the 2024 Global Multidimensional Poverty Index (MPI) report by the UN reveals alarming statistics showing India has the highest number of poor worldwide, with 234 million individuals living in poverty. Following India, Pakistan ranks second with 93 million, and the countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Democratic Republic of Congo also face extreme poverty. So you see, the poverty in India is rampant. This is just the hunger index. And we rank on the hunger index 97, and we are a hungry and poor nation, as we can see from here. And this is completely undermining the vision and the way Babasaheb Ambedkar envisioned this country. So I just wanted to give you the idea of how Babasaheb Ambedkar had this profound theory and practice of what he termed as the democratic socialism. And we will be looking at the other dimension of this democratic socialism in the last session, where we will be concentrating on his idea of how we are going to construct the Buddhist economics from this foundation of the 5 lectures. So I will stop here and I will open up the session for any insights or any questions or any discussion.
Mangesh, hi.
Hello.
This is Asif.
Hello,
So,
Ashok.
hello. After a long time.
Yes, yes,
So,
yes.
hi. This is a nice description of Ambedkar's vision. I was wondering, like in US, we have Bernie Sanders, who also describes his economic thought as democratic socialism, and there are some people in Congress like AOC and others
Right.
who also seems to be part of that. There is an official party called DSA, Democratic Socialist of America, and they have their own manifesto and things like that. So
Right.
the idea is like the economic structure will be socialistic, but the political structure will be democratic. So it's a mix of both, where you will have liberty and economics, as you talked about, um, and there will be no dictatorship of the party or the bureaucrats or the state.
Or the
Um,
individual enterprises, right?
agreed, agreed. So, is there any difference between Ambedkar's idea and what democratic socialists are doing here in not doing here, but at least talking about in US?
Right. Asif bhai, I have not studied the American contemporary history so much. I'm aware, frankly, about the ideas of Bernie Sanders and others. And we know, you know better than us as to what's happening in America today, talking about completely doing away with the government and the other ideas. And I think these are the evolving thoughts. And I think the thinking like this is found all over the places now, because people are fed up with what is happening, right, everywhere. And the incidences of poverty are on rise. I'm sure in America such is the case. And and I think this comes very close to the idea of Babasaheb Ambedkar. But what has happened in our country, as we know, that nobody has paid attention to Baba Saheb's rigorous thinking in this domain, and we were totally completely focusing on the political aspects of it and not talking about the economy, or what is going to happen to the people, and very very less debates or discussion. So I think the ideas are universal ideas. I showed you how Piketty is arguing, how Kuznets, and there are a lot of thinkers arguing on the similar lines as Baba Ambedkar argued. So I think it's a similar thing, but every ideology has a context. India has this very big monster which India faces all the time, the monster of caste, which is not there. So we have to always factor in the caste when we are thinking about India, right, Asif bhai? And
Agreed. And I think Ambedkar also talks about this. So, for example, in Constitution,
hmm,
the the understanding. of the economic philosophy was that it will be some kind of a socialist kind of structure which will take care of its poor and oppressed and lower caste people.
Yeah, yeah.
And basically, the economic vision of Ambedkar, the minimal intervention is there. It's not fully like the socialist.
It's not fully
Demo-
implemented, Asif bhai, but if you look at the similar case in Britain, the post-war Britain, as I have shown you in the last session, as to how they went for socialism following the Beveridge report. Because after the World War II, Churchill was defeated, and the Labour government came into power, and the National Health Security Scheme is the product of that. It's a socialist scheme, right? Right. The free education is a socialist scheme, right? Yeah, access to have education, to health, to housing is a socialist scheme, to use the word quote unquote. It's not that in, the so-called capitalist nations have not taken socialism as a, these Scandinavian countries, they are all socially democratic countries, right? There
yeah,
is so much.
Europeans are more like that social welfare kind of countries than
Yeah.
North American countries
Like
like Canada.
Norway or Sweden or, all these Scandinavian countries, they have a very deep form of social democracy, right?
Yeah.
Education is free, and health is accessible to everybody, not like India. It's a very strange situation, right?
The- but the counter that American people give to that is the European countries, they're small. First of all, they're small countries, so they can do that. And
Mhm.
second, they don't have big economic output as big as US in terms of tech and finance and things like that. So they
Yeah,
claim that the US claim is that you need capitalism for
yeah,
like highest level of innovation.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
obviously,
exactly.
China is a counterexample.
China
So
is a counterexample, and America itself. If we talk about the America, history of America, it's a like the railways and all. They were all nationalized. No, the power was nationalized in America. The banks were nationalized. So you see, it's the government comes to help of the corporates in America. They bail out the failing industries in America, right? So it's like double dealing. So
right, it's a hodgepodge.
yeah, it's a hodgepodge. But we should be clear. If there is a country, the aim is not to make profit, because the country is not a company, right? It has a different goal altogether. So if you want to put the government in the service of the only business or the capitalist classes, then big issues. And Nikhil makes a very important point. Huge subsidy is given to the FedEx, for example. It's a private enterprise, but it was hugely subsidized in US. A lot of big companies are subsidized in the US. Anyway, thank you so much, Asif bhai. That was very enriching and lovely to see you, Asif bhai. So, anyone has anything to say or comment?
Uh, I'm Professor Chandrasekhar, Daiwalaji. I wanted to just, make 2 points, very simple.
Yeah, yeah,
One is that even our, you know, so-called, class, backward SC, ST, all, that we called it oppressed class, is also does not understand this, value of social and economic democracy. They are never advocated. I've never heard it, except my father reading Sai sometime talks because he is an, voracious reader of Ambedkar
right, right.
movement and Ambedkar. So I feel like somewhere, whatever movement going on, whether political or any other movement, should talk about all three democratic, institutions rather than only political.
Yeah,
We always argue in India only political representation and political democracy. And even if you get it, you see this democracy, you are not going to get a decision making,
yeah,
in the Indian context, because institution from rural area, village to up top are in the hand of particular caste.
yeah,
That's very clear. Hmm? Second, I foresee this is unfortunate, which it should not happen. I wish in India there are going to be only two class, slave and master in future. The kind of educational opportunity now only, available to a few only.
right, right,
I
right. I agree.
understand. I understand. Like 50 year back, I did my schooling, primary schooling, or maybe like lower middle schooling in my
Hmm.
very remote Uttarakhand border, Uttar Pradesh school. At least at that time, there were teacher. There were some. classrooms, all basic infrastructure was there in late 70s and early 80s. Now, if you go to government funded school, you don't have teacher, you
Hmm.
don't have basic infrastructure.
Right.
Oh, okay. And those who have money, even in backward class, they move to private sector.
Yeah.
And now what left behind? Those who are marginalized, marginalized, they are just going to not to have any job in the market.
Yeah.
They will be unemployed, slaves, and on the mercy of these crony capitalists. This is my understanding if this continue.
I completely agree with what you are saying, Chandrasekhar Bhai. And I think the movements need to concentrate on these aspects of Babasaheb Ambedkar. One of the aim of this, uh, sessions was to really create that kind of fervor in the minds of the people that they should be looking at. We should be looking at as a community the great, the treasure trove of ideas left behind by Babasaheb Ambedkar. You see, so you are right on every point, every count, and I agree with what you are saying.
Thank you.
So, anyone has anything to say, offer as a way of comment, or even anything that pertains to our discussion today? So, just to these ideas are very profound, I would say, and it needs to be looked at again and again, discussed in the groups, thrashed out in the academic domain, and because the Indian academia, as we know, is completely dominated by a particular class of people. Babasaheb Ambedkar was never had the status of an economist, which he was par excellence, as we have seen his ideas, and he contributed so much to the economic development of country. And yet, he's hardly studied as economist, and that's the tragedy. Some of the scholars abroad are looking into Babasaheb's ideas, which is a very positive sign. And I reckon in the future, many people will be looking at this particular ideas of Babasaheb Ambedkar, and they will be influenced and informed by his very profound way of thinking. So I think this particular session and the idea of democratic socialism is very important. And as Asif said, or as Chandrasekhar said, we need to really now grapple with these ideas as a community, and think through, spread, talk to other citizens of this country. That how economic rights should be the part of the fundamental rights. They should not be just left in the non-enforceable, directive principle of the state policies. And I think that's the job that we all need to focus on. Okay.
Thank, yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think we have one more lecture on this, or is it
We
last
have
one?
one more lecture left.
Okay.
We have including today, we have
Yeah.
already had 4 lectures, and
Okay.
so I will provide the link to that if you are in the group. And
Yeah.
but I
I'm
will
in the
also,
group.
yeah, I will also put up this lecture, the recording of this lecture in the group, so that you can listen.
Okay.
Listen.
Thank you.
Nihalika has anything to say? What's she saying? This is I come from political science background, and never in our classes we were taught about economic ideas of ours. Nihalika, you are 100% right. And so we have to do our own inquiry, right? Okay, so we will end our session today and see you in the last session next week, 7 o'clock Friday. And I am inviting another person, Mrunal. She is working on Buddhist economics. So she will begin with fundamental ideas of Buddhist economics. And then I will build on Babasaheb's perspective on Buddhist economics and how we can have the model of Buddhist economics uh, viable today. So see you in the next session, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank you. Jai Bhim, Namo
Thank you,
Buddhaya.
sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya.
Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya.